Before we begin, let me share something that shifted the very ground beneath my feet, a moment born of harsh words that ultimately led me down an unexpected path to rediscovering myself. It's a story about the complex tapestry of family, the weight of expectations, and the quiet strength found when you're forced to stand entirely on your own. Mom, honestly, your opinion just doesn't matter anymore. The words hung in the air between us, sharp and glittering as shards of broken glass. They came from my daughter, Clara, the person I had poured my life, my love, my every resource into since the moment she drew her first breath. We were standing in the living room of the house she shared with her fiancé Mark, a house I'd helped them secure the down payment for. The argument had started innocuously enough, a gentle suggestion from me about their extravagant wedding plans, a quiet word about saving for the future, born not of criticism, but of love and experience. But Clara, flushed and defensive, her eyes flashing with an impatience I hadn't seen directed at me before, hadn't heard caution. She'd heard judgment, and her response wasn't just dismissive, it was a blade to the heart. "Doesn't matter?" I repeated, the words barely a whisper, my breath caught in my throat. All those years, the sleepless nights, the scraped knees kissed better, the homework help, the driving lessons, the tuition fees paid, the endless listening, the unwavering support, suddenly felt like dust motes dancing unseen in the afternoon light. My identity, so intricately woven with the title Clara's mom, felt like it was unraveling thread by painful thread. Mark shifted uncomfortably beside her, avoiding my gaze. Clara, however, stood firm, crossing her arms, a defiant tilt to her chin. "We're adults, Mom. We can make our own decisions. We don't need your approval or your commentary on everything." Commentary. Was that what my concern sounded like? Just unwanted noise? The shock was profound, a physical blow that left me reeling. Disbelief warred with a deep, aching hurt that settled low in my stomach. This wasn't just about wedding plans, it felt like a fundamental rejection of me, of our history, of the very foundation of my world. Her words were cruel, not just in their content but in their finality. There was no room for discussion, no acknowledgement of my intentions, just a slammed door on decades of connection. In that moment, vulnerable and utterly bewildered, I knew something irreparable had fractured. The drive home was a blur of unshed tears and a hollow ache in my chest. Each mile marker felt like a station on a journey away from the daughter I thought I knew. The silence in the car was deafening, amplifying the echo of her words. "Your opinion just doesn't matter." I parked in my own driveway, the familiar brick house suddenly feeling alien, too large, too quiet. Inside, the photos on the mantelpiece mocked me. Clara's gap-toothed grin in kindergarten, her proud stance at high school graduation, the beaming photo from her engagement party just 6 months ago. Had I imagined the closeness? Had I misinterpreted years of shared laughter and confidences? The isolation wasn't physical. I was in my own home, surrounded by my things. But emotionally, I felt utterly adrift, cast off from the shore of the relationship that had anchored my life for over 2 decades. My first instinct was to call her, to demand an explanation, an apology, anything to bridge the chasm that had opened between us. I picked up my phone, her number ready, my thumb hovering over the call button. But then a wave of weariness washed over me. What would I say? Would she even listen? Or would I be met with more dismissal, more impatience? I remembered her face, the hard set of her jaw, the defiant spark in her eyes. She hadn't misspoken. She'd meant it. I put the phone down, no calls, no texts, demanding understanding. That felt like begging for validation I shouldn't have to solicit. Instead, I sat on the sofa, the plush velvet suddenly feeling cold, and let the harsh reality sink in. My former life, where my role as mom was central, defined by her needs, her milestones, her orbit, felt like a distant dream. The expectation had always been that this bond would deepen, evolve, but remain fundamental. Now, the reality was starkly different. I was apparently superfluous, my input irrelevant. A difficult choice began to form, not born of anger, but of a strange, chilling clarity. I wouldn't chase her. I wouldn't try to force her to see my value. If my opinion didn't matter, perhaps it was time to stop offering it so freely, to stop investing my emotional energy where it was so clearly unwanted. It felt like a sacrifice, severing a lifeline, choosing a path into the unknown fog of my own life, separate from hers. But the alternative, clinging to someone who had so carelessly cast me aside, felt even more desolate. The following weeks were a strange kind of journey, one navigated not across landscapes, but through the unfamiliar terrain of my own inner world. I didn't pack a suitcase or buy a plane ticket, but I was definitely traveling away from the source of my pain, putting emotional distance between myself and the stinging dismissal. My home, once a sanctuary filled with memories of Clara, now felt like a starting point for something new, albeit undefined. The new environment wasn't a bustling city or a quiet village. It was the space within my own life that Clara's sudden detachment had created. It was vast, echoey, and initially terrifying. Routines that had revolved around her, weekly calls, anticipating her visits, planning things she might enjoy, evaporated, leaving gaping holes in my days. I found myself wandering through rooms, picking up objects, trying to reconnect with the person I was before Mom became my primary identifier. Who was Elena, really? I'd been a graphic designer before Clara was born, a job I'd loved but willingly set aside for full-time motherhood. Could I even remember how to be that person? The initial challenges were immense. The silence was heavy, punctuated only by the ticking clock and the hum of the refrigerator. Loneliness was a constant companion, a dull ache behind my ribs. I felt adrift, purposeless. There were days I barely got out of bed, the hurt paralyzing me. I replayed the conversation countless times, searching for my mistake, for a way I could have prevented it. Was I too overbearing, too involved? Or was this simply the inevitable, painful severing of apron strings delivered with unnecessary cruelty? I felt stripped bare, vulnerable like an exposed nerve. This was my lowest point, emotionally exhausted, questioning my worth, utterly alone in this new landscape of self-evaluation. The future stretched before me, a blank canvas I had no idea how to fill. The vibrant colors of my life seemed to have faded, leaving only shades of gray uncertainty. One particularly bleak afternoon, staring blankly at a wall, the phone rang. It wasn't Clara. It was Maggie, an old friend from my design days, someone I hadn't seen nearly enough since our lives diverged. Her voice, warm and familiar, cut through the fog of my despair. "Eleanor, I was just thinking about you. How are things?" I hesitated, unsure how much to reveal, the shame of the situation still raw. But something in Maggie's easy tone made me open up. Tentatively at first, then with a rush of pent-up emotion, I told her about the argument, Clara's words, the echoing silence since. I expected pity, perhaps awkwardness. Instead, Maggie listened patiently, her occasional a comforting anchor. When I finished, voice thick with unshed tears, she didn't offer platitudes. She said simply, "Oh, Elena, that sounds incredibly painful. But honestly, it also sounds like Clara's loss." Her words were unexpected. Loss for Clara? "What do you mean?" I asked, genuinely confused. "Well," Maggie continued, her voice gentle but firm, "she just dismissed decades of unconditional love and support. That's a huge thing to push away. And Elena," she paused, letting her next words sink in, "you are so much more than just Clara's mother. You were Elena, the talented designer, the witty friend, the woman with a killer eye for color, long before she came along. Don't let her forget that. More importantly, don't you forget that." Hearing that, hearing someone acknowledge the me that existed before and outside of motherhood, felt like finding a small sheltered cove after being tossed in a storm. It wasn't a magic solution, but it was a glimmer of light, a reminder that my identity wasn't solely dependent on my daughter's validation. Maggie didn't try to fix it. She simply offered perspective and reminded me of my own inherent worth. That conversation became a lifeline. We started talking more regularly, then meeting for coffee. Maggie didn't pry about Clara, but she consistently steered the conversation towards me, my thoughts, my feelings, my dormant interests. It was the beginning of finding sanctuary, not in a physical place, but in the rediscovery of neglected parts of myself, nurtured by the unexpected kindness and clear-sighted validation of an old friend. It was the first tentative step towards finding safety within my own skin again. Maggie's gentle nudging sparked something within me. "What about that old easel in your attic?" she'd asked one afternoon over coffee. "You used to love painting." The thought initially felt foreign, almost indulgent. Painting, when my world felt so fractured, but the seed was planted. Hesitantly, I ventured into the dusty attic, retrieving the easel and a box of dried-up tubes of paint and stiff brushes. Setting it up in the spare room, the one that had briefly been Clara's nursery, felt symbolic. This space, once dedicated to her, would now be mine. The first attempts were clumsy, frustrating. My hands felt stiff, my eye rusty. Mixing colors felt like alchemy I'd long forgotten. There were moments I wanted to give up, overwhelmed by how much skill I'd lost, how inadequate I felt. It mirrored the larger feeling of incompetence Clara's words had instilled. But Maggie's voice echoed in my mind. "You are more than just Clara's mother." So, I persisted. I bought new paints, fresh canvases. I started small, sketching simple objects, relearning the feel of charcoal on paper, the way light fell across a surface. I watched online tutorials, visited galleries, immersing myself in a world I had willingly abandoned decades ago. It was work, hard work, both physically and emotionally. It required patience I didn't always feel I possessed. It meant sitting with frustration, pushing through creative blocks, silencing the inner critic that whispered Clara's dismissive words. Slowly, painstakingly, something began to shift. The feel of the brush in my hand became familiar again. The joy of capturing a particular shade of blue, the satisfaction of rendering a shadow correctly. These small victories began to accumulate. I wasn't just painting, I was rebuilding. Each stroke was an act of reclaiming my time, my focus, myself. This work wasn't about producing masterpieces. It was about the process, the dedication, the quiet resilience discovered in showing up day after day for myself, learning and adapting not for anyone else's approval, but for the simple, growing satisfaction of creation. My rediscovered passion for painting became a bridge back into the world, beyond the quiet solitude of my home studio. Maggie encouraged me to join a local art group that met weekly in the community center. Walking in that first evening, clutching a small portfolio of recent sketches, felt nerve-wracking. These were strangers, artists of varying levels, and the fear of judgment, still lingering from Clara's dismissal, prickled at my skin. But the atmosphere was welcoming, filled with the smell of turpentine and shared enthusiasm. People admired a landscape I'd hesitantly pinned up, offered gentle critiques, shared tips. An older woman named Martha, whose vibrant watercolors were breathtaking, took me under her wing, sharing techniques for capturing light. A younger man, Ben, praised my emerging style. Here I wasn't Clara's mom, I was Elena, the artist exploring her voice. I started volunteering at a local gallery Maggie was involved with, helping hang exhibitions, meeting other artists and art lovers. Slowly, tentative connections deepened into genuine friendships. We talked about art, life, struggles, and triumphs. They saw my dedication, my willingness to learn, my quiet resilience. Their acceptance wasn't conditional. It was based on shared interest and mutual respect. The contrast with the strained dynamic with Clara was stark. With my new friends, I felt seen and valued for who I was right now, not measured against a past role or future expectation. Participating in a small group exhibition at the community center was a significant step. Seeing my paintings framed and hung alongside others, receiving positive feedback from attendees, filled me with a quiet pride I hadn't felt in years. This growing sense of belonging, of being integrated into a community that appreciated my contributions and my presence, was profoundly healing. It wasn't replacing the connection with my daughter, but it was building a different kind of foundation, one based on shared passions and mutual validation, proving that my worth wasn't solely defined by one relationship. A turning point arrived unexpectedly during the annual town art fair. Martha had encouraged me to rent a small booth, a prospect that initially terrified me. Displaying my work so publicly, putting a price on it. It felt incredibly vulnerable, but with encouragement from Maggie and my art group friends, I took the leap. I spent weeks preparing, carefully selecting my best pieces, framing them, practicing my nervous sales pitch. The day itself was a whirlwind of interactions, conversations about technique, color, inspiration. And then something amazing happened. People didn't just look, they bought my paintings, not out of pity, but because they genuinely connected with them. A woman bought a small landscape because it reminded her of her childhood home. A young couple chose a vibrant floral piece for their new apartment. By the end of the day, I had sold nearly half my inventory. Holding the cash, earned entirely through my own rediscovered talent and hard work, was electrifying. It wasn't about the amount, it was the validation. It was tangible proof that I could create something of value, something that resonated with others, entirely separate from my role as a mother or my past life. Standing there, packing up my remaining canvases as the sun set, a profound realization washed over me. My self-worth wasn't tied to Clara's opinion. It wasn't diminished by her dismissal. It resided within me, in my ability to learn, to create, to connect, to build something new from the fragments of the old. I started to envision a future shaped by my own choices, fueled by my own passions. Perhaps I could teach a beginner's painting class, maybe collaborate with Ben on a project. The possibilities felt open, exciting. The pain of Clara's words hadn't vanished entirely, but it no longer defined me. It was a scar, a reminder of a past hurt, but the wound itself was healing, replaced by the quiet, growing strength of self-reliance and purpose. Life settled into a new rhythm, filled with painting, friends, gallery volunteering, and a burgeoning sense of peace. Then, one crisp autumn afternoon, an email landed in my inbox. The sender, Clara. My heart gave a jolt, a familiar mix of hope and apprehension swirling within me. It was the first direct contact in almost a year, aside from curt holiday texts. I hesitated before opening it, bracing myself. The email was brief, almost businesslike. She and Mark were having trouble qualifying for a larger mortgage for a new house they wanted. She wondered if I might be willing to co-sign or perhaps offer another loan, similar to the down payment help. There was no apology, no acknowledgement of our last conversation, no inquiry about my life. Just a request, assuming my resources and willingness were still automatically available to her. Reading it, I didn't feel the sharp sting of hurt like before. Instead, a wave of calm resolve washed over me. Her email crystallized the decision that had been forming in my mind for months. My opinion didn't matter, she had said. My input wasn't valued. Yet, my financial backing, a direct result of the life I'd built, the life she dismissed, was suddenly essential. It felt profoundly hypocritical. I thought about my will, the document that currently named her as the primary beneficiary of the assets I'd carefully accumulated over my lifetime. Assets earned through work she never asked about, saved through prudence she marked as commentary. That evening, I called my lawyer. I explained the situation calmly, outlining my desire to change my will. Not out of spite, but out of principle. My estate would go to support the art foundation I now volunteered with, a scholarship fund for aspiring artists at the community college, and a portion to Maggie, whose friendship had been a lifeline. It felt right. It felt aligned with the life I was now living, the values I held, the community that nurtured me. Preparing for the inevitable conversation with Clara felt different this time. I wasn't bracing for a fight. I was preparing to state a fact, a consequence of her own declared stance. I discussed it with Maggie, who simply listened and nodded. It's your life, Elena, your legacy. You decide who and what matters to you now. Her quiet support solidified my resolve. I was ready. I replied to Clara's email, suggesting we meet for coffee. Not at my house, not at hers, but on neutral ground, a quiet cafe downtown. When she arrived, looking stylish and confident, there was a flicker of the old warmth in her eyes, quickly replaced by a business-like focus. After exchanging brief pleasantries, she launched into the details of the house, the mortgage issue, expecting me to seamlessly step into my old role of financial rescuer. I let her finish sipping my latte, my hands steady around the warm mug. Then I met her gaze directly. "Clara," I began, my voice calm and even, "I received your email, but before we talk about finances, there's something else we need to address." She looked surprised, perhaps a little impatient. "Okay? What is it?" "Do you remember our last conversation, about a year ago at your place?" Her brow furrowed slightly. Vaguely, we argued about the wedding. We did, and you told me very clearly that my opinion doesn't matter anymore. I saw a flicker of recognition, then annoyance, cross her face. Mom, are we seriously going back to that? I was stressed. Can we just focus on the house? No, Clara, we can't just move past it, I said, keeping my tone level. Because those words had consequences. You drew a line defining the terms of our relationship. You made it clear that my input, my perspective, my experience, essentially the sum of who I am and the life I've lived, was irrelevant to you. She shifted uncomfortably. So, what does that have to do with anything? It has everything to do with this, I replied gently but firmly. My financial resources are a direct result of that life, those opinions, those choices you dismissed. If my opinion doesn't matter, Clara, then neither should my financial support, derived from that same source. Her eyes widened, shock finally registering. What are you saying? I'm saying I won't be co-signing your loan, nor will I be providing any further financial assistance, I stated plainly. And I also need to tell you that I've recently updated my will. You are no longer named as a beneficiary. The color drained from her face. Mark, who had joined us a few minutes late, looked bewildered. You cut me out of your will? Clara stammered, disbelief warring with anger. Because I said your opinion didn't matter. Not because you said it, Clara, I clarified patiently. But as a reflection of what you said, it's about alignment. You set the boundary. You declared my contribution to your life in terms of guidance and opinion as null. I am simply respecting that boundary in all aspects, including financial legacies derived from that same life you dismissed. She started to argue, her voice rising. This is unbelievable. You're doing this to punish me. No, I said quietly, meeting her furious gaze without flinching. This isn't punishment. This is acceptance. Acceptance of the terms you dictated. My assets will go to causes and people who value the connection we share, who see worth in the life I've built. I truly wish you well, Clara. I hope you build a wonderful life with Mark. But you'll need to do it based on your own resources and decisions, without recourse to an opinion or a bank account that you've made clear doesn't matter. I stood up, leaving money for the coffees on the table. There was nothing more to say. The confrontation wasn't loud or explosive, but the finality hung heavy in the air. Her face, a mask of shock and dawning realization, said everything. Clara didn't try to argue further. She sat there, stunned into silence as I walked out of the cafe and into the bright afternoon sun. There was no triumphant surge, no vindictive pleasure, just a quiet sense of closure, a feeling of having finally aligned my actions with my reality. Mark caught up to me briefly on the sidewalk, stammering something about Clara being stressed, maybe not meaning it, but I just shook my head gently. She meant it, Mark, and I've accepted it. It's time you both did too. He retreated, looking lost. Driving home, I felt lighter than I had in a year. The weight of expectation, both mine and hers, had lifted. Back in my studio, the familiar scent of oil paint welcomed me. Sunlight streamed through the window, illuminating the canvas I was currently working on, a landscape filled with vibrant, hopeful colors. My life wasn't empty without Clara at its center. It was simply different. It was full of friendships that nurtured me, passions that excited me, a community that embraced me, and a growing sense of peace I hadn't known was possible. My success wasn't measured in dollars passed down, but in the richness of my daily life, the connections I'd forged, the quiet confidence I now carried. My paintings continued to sell modestly, enough to fund my supplies and contribute to the Art Foundation. I started teaching that beginner's class at the community center, finding joy in sharing my rediscovered passion. My relationship with Maggie and my art group friends deepened, becoming the family of my choosing. Sometimes, looking back, I feel a pang of sadness for the relationship Clara and I once had, for the closeness that dissolved under the weight of her dismissal. But mostly, I feel gratitude. Gratitude for the unexpected path her hurtful words inadvertently set me upon. That moment of rejection, so painful at the time, forced me to step outside the comfortable, confining role of mom and rediscover Elena. It compelled me to build a life based on my own worth, my own interests, my own terms. Her declaration that my opinion didn't matter, ironically, freed me to create a life where my opinion, my choices, and my happiness mattered profoundly to me. And in the end, that's the only validation I truly needed. The future feels open, painted in the bright hues of possibility, a testament to the resilience found not in spite of the fall, but because of it.